A wave of dizziness washed over me. Suddenly, I felt the weight in my hands lighten. I stared at my hands in shock. Just moments ago, I had been cradling my grandson, soothing him through the night. But now, all that remained in my hands was a flimsy white piece of paper. I had been reborn, back to 1985. This was the moment I had just discovered that my husband, Michael Carter, had rented out a house to Ethan Reed. The piece of paper in my hands was the lease agreement. My grip tightened, crumpling the document. At this moment, Michael Carter was sound asleep in bed. The contract clearly stated in black and white that he had rented out a 3-unit courtyard, paying a full year's rent up front. I lifted my eyes and took in the attic where we had lived for over a decade. The roof leaked when it rained. The wind howled through the cracks whenever there was a storm. I had endured chronic joint pain for years. There were times when I truly couldn't bear it anymore. Whenever I suggested using our savings to buy a better home, Michael Carter would always look at me with deep frustration. Since when did you become so spoiled? Now even a house has to be chosen so carefully. If we waste money on this, how are we going to afford to raise kids in the future? Back then, I was completely lost in the happiness of hearing him talk about our future children. I never stopped to think. Our savings were more than enough to afford a better home. I also ignored a simple truth. Someone who truly loves you would never let you suffer. The moment I discovered this contract, a wave of fury shot through me. I couldn't accept the fact that after struggling for half my life, I was still living in a leaky attic, while Michael Carter had so generously provided Mia Brooks with a 3-unit courtyard. My heart turned cold. I demanded a divorce. Michael Carter knew exactly how to manipulate my soft spot. He pushed Mia Brooks' young son in front of me, his face full of righteous indignation. Can you really bear to see a mother and child suffer? You've always had a soft spot for kids. Then he continued. I thought you were kind-hearted and wouldn't let a child endure hardship, which is why I've helped them so much. But I never expected you to be so jealous. I'm truly disappointed in you. Michael Carter knew me too well. Because of years of overworking, my health had suffered, making it difficult for me to conceive. That's why I adored the neighbor's children so much. That moment, looking at the frail, skinny little boy, I did soften. But from that day on, Michael Carter and Mia Brooks became even more brazen. First, he praised my cooking skills and asked me to make meals for the child. Then he asked me to sew clothes for him. Until one day, I overheard the boy calling Michael Carter Dad. Michael Carter acted as if it was only natural, saying, "The kid doesn't have a father at school. He'll get bullied. For helping them, we should help them all the way." Over time, the neighbors all started assuming that Michael Carter was Mia Brooks' new husband. And me? I was merely the housekeeper he had hired to take care of her. Many even envied Mia Brooks for her good fortune. A gust of cold wind suddenly blew through the attic, sending a shiver down my spine. The newspaper patched on the wall to block the wind had torn, letting the icy air seep in. That moment, I made up my mind. Since I had been given a second chance, it wasn't to repeat the same path of regret. With that thought, I raised my foot and kicked Michael Carter hard. Then, I flung the crumpled lease agreement straight at his furious face. Divorce. Michael Carter instantly sobered up. He sat up from the bed, completely unashamed, and scolded me. Who gave you permission to touch my things? There was an unspoken rule in our household. Our belongings were kept separate. He had his own storage box, and I had mine. I never meddled with his things. Back then, I had foolishly believed it was because he didn't want me to overwork myself. I even thought it was sweet. In reality, it was just a way to hide his secrets. I sneered. You're the one who didn't put it away properly. How is that my fault? Only then did Michael Carter recall that last night, after the power had gone out at Mia Brooks' place, he had rummaged through the box for a light bulb but left in a hurry without tidying up. For a brief moment, his expression stiffened. Then, he straightened his neck and retorted, "Is something this trivial really worth a divorce? That mother and child have such a hard life. Don't you know that?" I almost laughed. A hard life? Mia Brooks' ex-husband was constantly begging her to take him back, showering her with pastries and new clothes. She proudly declared she was a modern woman who refused to be anyone's housewife. And yet, Michael Carter had given her the job that I had fought so hard to secure at the clothing factory. I questioned him, but all he left me with was a dismissive, "As long as I'm providing for you at home, that's all that matters. You're not independent like others." Just like that, he categorized me as someone incompetent, completely reliant on him. But was I? I woke up before dawn to sell vegetables at the market. In the afternoon, I worked as a seamstress for others. By evening, I was hauling produce again. More than half of our household expenses were covered by me. Yet, Mia Brooks got a job and didn't even appreciate it. She looked down on working as a factory laborer. With no experience at all, she demanded to be a supervisor. When she threw a fit over not getting her way, the factory had enough and fired her. Because of her, they refused to hire me again either. I didn't want to keep arguing with Michael Carter anymore. I had spent half my life tangled in endless fights with him. I knew him too well. He would always find a way to blame others instead of reflecting on himself. Instead of wasting my breath, I turned around and started packing my things. Seeing that I was serious this time, he shot up from the bed in anger and grabbed my wrist. You were the one who shamelessly begged me to marry you in the first place. Now you're throwing a tantrum over something so trivial? Are you trying to play hard to get? Yes, back then, I was the one who fell hopelessly in love with him. I had been coming home late from a night shift when I was surrounded by some thugs in a dark alley. Michael Carter had suddenly appeared, driving them away and escorting me home. I couldn't help but fall for him. When I found out he wasn't seeing anyone, I began showing up in front of him every day, bringing him homemade lunchboxes. Eventually, he agreed to marry me, but what I didn't know was that just the day before he gave me his answer, Mia Brooks had gotten married. I was nothing more than his second choice, a consolation prize after his first love was gone. Every 2 years after our wedding, Mia Brooks would show up with her child, crying about how her ex-husband mistreated her, how he was violent. That was all it took for Michael Carter to start reminiscing about their past. He supported her and her child financially, gradually turning me into nothing more than their housekeeper. Even after our own child was born, his attitude never changed. He raised our child to believe that I was just a servant, never as dazzling as Mia Brooks. I worked myself to the bone day and night, and in the end, I collapsed and died in the middle of the night. And Michael Carter had only helped speed up my demise. Seeing that I had stayed silent for a long time, his expression softened slightly. He reached out, as if trying to pull me into his arms. I took a deep breath and pulled a divorce agreement out of my bag. I had been carrying it with me ever since Mia Brooks reappeared, but I had never been able to muster the courage to go through with it. Until now. Michael Carter's hand stiffened in mid-air. When he saw that I had prepared the papers in advance, his face instantly twisted with rage. So this isn't just about the house, is it? You've been planning this all along. Since you're so determined to leave me, I'll grant your wish. Without hesitation, he grabbed the pen, signed his name, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, clutching the divorce papers, unable to loosen my grip. It felt like a one-way ticket to freedom. In my past life, I had prepared this agreement but never dared to bring it up. The reason was simple. I didn't have a single cent to my name. All my money had gone into furnishing our home. The fridge, the black and white TV, the tape recorder, and countless household necessities. But Michael Carter accused me of wasting money. Yet, he was the one who sighed enviously every time he saw someone else buying new appliances. And because of that, he insisted that I hand over my salary every month, claiming he was saving money for me. What he really wanted was control. He was never afraid I would actually leave, because he knew I had no means to. Back then, that had been enough to keep me shackled, too scared to start over. But now, even though I was still penniless, I had courage. That same afternoon, I went door to door to my neighbors and contacted a second-hand appliance dealer. I sold off everything I had bought. If Michael Carter had always despised the things I purchased, then I wasn't going to leave them behind for him to enjoy. I sold it all. One of the neighbor ladies, watching the workers haul away my furniture, curiously asked, "Are you guys moving? By the way, I saw your husband walking with a young woman earlier. What's going on?" I watched as my belongings were carried out of the house and simply smiled. I wouldn't know anything about that. I got divorced. The neighbor lady clicked her tongue in surprise. After all, very few people chose to divorce at this time. Just as the last piece of furniture was hauled out, Mia Brooks walked toward me, swaying her hips, holding her child's hand. She was drenched in a heavy perfume, dressed in crisp, brand new clothes, looking as radiant as ever. A wave of deep discomfort surged in my chest, but I acted as if I hadn't seen her. But some people just couldn't stay away. With a delicate smile, Mia Brooks let her gaze settle on my suitcase. "Oh my, Auntie, where are you off to?" She had always called me that, even though we were nearly the same age. The way she addressed me made it seem as if I were an elder, as if I belonged to an entirely different generation. I had tolerated it before, but now, I had no patience for it anymore. Feigning a polite smile, I replied coldly, "Ma'am, Michael isn't home. Come back another day." Just that one change in address made her face turn red with embarrassment. From inside the house, Michael Carter's voice suddenly rang out, questioning the workers. Before anyone could react, Mia Brooks discreetly pinched her child's waist. The boy immediately burst into tears, wailing at the top of his lungs. Pretending to console him, Mia Brooks looked utterly pitiful. The child, caught in his own mother's act, cried even louder, screaming, "I want Daddy! Daddy! Someone's bullying me!" That was all it took for Michael Carter to drop everything and rush forward, stepping protectively in front of Mia Brooks and the child. His voice softened instantly as he reassured, "Daddy's here. Daddy's right here. No one will bully you, sweetheart." Then, without so much as a single question, he turned to me, his expression darkening. "Sophia Miller, what's the meaning of this? The house was my decision. It has nothing to do with Mia. If you have a problem, take it up with me. What kind of person takes their anger out on a child?" I stared at the three of them, so obviously a family unit. I had known for a long time what kind of man Michael Carter was, yet seeing it so blatantly in front of me still sent a sharp pain through my chest. He didn't even have the decency to ask what had happened before taking their side. Enough. There was no point in arguing with a fool. I had no interest in getting tangled in their mess any longer. All I wanted was to start my new life as soon as possible. Gripping my suitcase, I turned to leave, but Mia Brooks, now looking anxious, quickly grabbed onto my suitcase. "Sophia, if there's some misunderstanding, let's talk it out. There's no need to act impulsively. Are you leaving on your own? Or is there another man waiting for you?" I yanked my suitcase back, my patience running thin. I'm not like some people. I have 2 hands and 2 feet. I can take care of myself. I hadn't even used any force. Yet Mia Brooks let out a dramatic yelp and collapsed onto the ground. In an instant, her eyes welled with tears, and she held up her hand, revealing a scrape on her palm. "Sophia, I know you don't like me, but you can't just..." Before she could finish, her child immediately rushed over, wailing like the sky was falling, screaming for his mother as if she had been gravely injured. I was still trying to process what had just happened when Michael Carter grabbed me roughly. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and slapped me across the face. I covered my cheek, stunned. For a brief second, Michael Carter looked down at his own hand, frozen. No matter how cruel his words had been before, no matter how many times he had belittled me, he had never once hit me. I let out a cold laugh. "Fine. Very well." I picked up my suitcase and turned to leave. But suddenly, Michael Carter lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. "We've known each other for over 10 years. Are you really leaving?" Michael Carter's voice was laced with disbelief. "And you're not even going to apologize to Mia? I thought you were a reasonable person, but it turns out you're no different from a street shrew, hitting a child, attacking an adult. Sophia Miller, I'm truly disappointed in you." I looked at Michael Carter's face, filled with frustration and disapproval, and felt nothing but disgust. He kept going, unwilling to stop. "This was just a minor argument, and you're already demanding a divorce? If every couple acted like you, how would anyone stay married? If you lower your head now, apologize to Mia, and buy some candy for the kid, we'll let this go. Otherwise, when you're struggling to survive out there, don't expect me to take you back." Not only did his words make me sick to my stomach, but hearing them out loud made me want to vomit. His shouting had drawn a crowd. People gathered around, whispering amongst themselves, their words slipping into my ears. Has Sophia lost her mind? What's she making such a fuss about divorce for? Isn't Michael a great husband? He makes money and takes care of the household. Where is she ever going to find a better man? Hearing these comments, Michael Carter puffed up with pride, convinced I was just putting on a show and wouldn't actually leave. It was exactly this sanctimonious act of his that made me want to divorce him even more. He could fool everyone else, but I had seen his true face for years. Several people started stepping forward, trying to persuade me to reconsider, making me question for a brief moment whether the Michael Carter I had suffered under even existed. I let go of my suitcase and stared at him. "You think I don't want to keep this marriage? You've given another woman a house, taken care of her like she's your second wife, and I'm the one who isn't supposed to leave." His brows furrowed as if I had just said something incomprehensible, his face filled with disappointment. "Haven't I told you? Mia is a single mother struggling to raise a child. Shouldn't we help those in need? You used to be so kind. When did you become so petty?" One of the older neighbor ladies opened her mouth, about to persuade me, but I only wanted to rip apart Michael Carter's smooth-talking mouth. "Right. You're such a kind man. Running to change her light bulb in the middle of the night. Standing outside her courtyard every evening. Coming back smelling like her perfume. Do you really think I don't know what that means? You're the best person in the world, aren't you? Rushing to become a stepfather before anyone even asked. His face instantly darkened. In a panic, he reached out and covered the child's ears. Are you insane? Saying such things in front of a kid. Have you no shame? I looked down at the child. When he gazed at Michael Carter, his face was filled with innocence and pity. But when his eyes turned to me, he grinned and stuck out his tongue in a mocking gesture. He was completely sure I wouldn't do anything to him. This child had been raised by Mia Brooks to be a tool, always ready to put on an act to support her. I felt no sympathy for him. If anything, I felt deeply wronged. On my birthday, this very child had poured boiling water over himself on purpose, claiming that I had done it out of jealousy because he had stolen my spotlight. Because he was just a child. Everyone, including Michael Carter, immediately believed him. I had been publicly shamed, punished for something I never did. There had been too many moments like that. Being accused of bullying a child, of being petty and jealous. It was endless. Thinking about it now, I couldn't hold back the sting in my nose. A single tear rolled down my cheek. For the first time, Michael Carter hesitated. His hand stiffened, his expression turning slightly uneasy. He reached for a handkerchief, as if to wipe my tears away. I took one last look at him. Then, without hesitation, I turned and walked away. For the rest of my life, I wanted nothing to do with this family. Behind me, his voice called out my name. By the third time, the child clung to him and called out, "Daddy." And just as expected, Michael Carter didn't take another step toward me. I dragged my suitcase and went straight to collect my wages from my previous temp job before heading home. My parents had just returned from work when I arrived. The moment they found out that I had divorced Michael Carter without saying a word, my father flew into a rage. Without hesitation, he stormed out of the yard, grabbed a tree branch, and came back, his face red with anger. Something this big, and you made the decision on your own? Do you even consider us your parents anymore? His voice was thunderous as he continued. Go and apologize to Michael right now. Beg him to take you back. Michael has a soft heart. If you say a few nice words and admit your mistake, he won't hold this against you. I looked at my parents with deep disappointment. My mother sat on a chair, her face filled with worry, as if the sky had just collapsed. How could you not cherish such a good marriage? She muttered, sighing heavily. Even if he has someone else outside, what does it matter? The important thing is to keep control of the money. Who cares where his heart is? Men, how many of them don't cheat? Do you really think you'll find a better one if you leave? Old things need to be mended, not thrown away. Marriage is the same. If you keep acting like this, making a big deal out of small things, who would ever want you in the future? I couldn't understand. Why? Was my fate tied solely to marriage? Without a man, was my only option to wait for death? Even after getting a divorce, I was still expected to be nothing more than a man's possession, just switching from one to another. Had Michael Carter, as terrible as he was, already been my best possible choice? All the frustration I had bottled up throughout the day suddenly erupted. So he's not in the wrong for keeping a mistress? Everything is my fault? My fault for marrying him in the first place? My fault for being born a daughter? He's out there playing stepfather to someone else's kid, and I'm supposed to willingly step in as the stepmother? Even though the child's mother is still right there? What do you all take me for? I had always been obedient, always swallowed my pride. But for once, I talked back. I thought, just for a moment, that maybe they would understand. But before I could react, something heavy struck my shoulder. Pain shot through me, and tears welled up in my eyes. My mother glared at me with disapproval. You think just because you can make a little money now, you can talk back to your parents? Without us, you are nothing. Everything we do is for your own good. In this world, a girl without a man to protect her will suffer. You already had such a good life, but you're still ungrateful. Keep this up, and the heavens will take away all your blessings. Then she threw down an ultimatum. Either go apologize to Michael, or tomorrow, I'll arrange a blind date for you. I trembled with rage, my entire body shaking. I refused to give in. Holding my head high, I declared, I'm going north. That night, they locked me in my room. Stay in there until you've reflected on your mistakes and stop dreaming about nonsense. That moment, I saw everything clearly. Was marriage truly the only path for a woman? Had I struggled through life just to become someone's wife, someone's mother, living my whole life for others? Why couldn't women, like men, have their own ambitions? My resolve to leave only strengthened. In the middle of the night, I reached under the cabinet, pulled out a pair of scissors, and pried open the door lock. Before slipping out, I left some money on the table. Then, I quietly disappeared into the night. I spent the night at the bus station, dozing off as I waited for the earliest bus to the capital. When I finally boarded, the vehicle rocked gently with the road's movement, and I drifted in and out of dreams. In my dreams, I saw my past self, clutching a pillow, crying silently, not daring to make a sound. Then, I saw golden sunlight flickering over blades of grass, swaying gently in the wind. I realized I would be like that grass. I might look fragile, but I was resilient. Slowly, I opened my eyes and gazed out the window, watching the sunrise. The sky was brightening, and in that moment, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my future. In my past life, no matter what I did, I had always been criticized, but there was one thing no one had ever found fault with: my cooking. Not only had I cooked every single day, becoming skilled through practice, but it was the one thing that had ever truly brought me joy. Cooking allowed me to lose myself in the process, to find genuine happiness. I decided that when I arrived in the capital, I would open a breakfast shop. When I got off the bus, I took a deep breath, not out of fear for the unknown, but out of excitement for what was to come. I was finally about to start a new chapter. The beeping of my phone came from my pocket. Without even looking, I hung up. I didn't need to check. I already knew that all that awaited me on the other end was more scolding. Just as I stepped out of the station, a small hand tugged at the hem of my coat. I turned around and saw a little girl. She was barefoot, her clothes tattered with small holes, and her messy short hair hung in uneven strands around her face. Her big eyes blinked as she looked up at me and asked, "Auntie, my parents don't want me anymore. Can you take me with you?" My heart trembled. Instinctively, I took a step back. The girl's face instantly fell, her head lowering in disappointment. I hesitated. A part of me couldn't bear to leave her, but another part was wary. I had read too many posters about human traffickers using children as bait to scam kind-hearted people. I was alone. What if this was a trap? I turned and walked 2 steps away. When I glanced back, I saw her crouched on the ground, hugging herself into a tiny ball. My resolve wavered, and I couldn't help but turn back and ask her a few questions. From her halting explanation, I learned that she came from a family of 4 children. When her youngest brother was born, she, being the 3rd child and considered useless labor, was sold off. She had run away, her bare feet covered in bruises and cuts. Looking at her bright, tear-filled eyes, I felt a pang in my heart. "Auntie, I can learn to earn money. Please take me with you. I don't eat much. I'm easy to take care of." The first thing I did was take her to the police station to verify her story. The officers confirmed that everything she had said was true. Her parents didn't even bother to show up. They only left a cold message with the police. "If she's such a burden to you, and you have extra money to spare, just take her." I clenched my fists in anger, so I gave her a new name, Chloe Song, hoping that, like the morning sun, she would always have a bright and radiant smile. I took Chloe to buy a pair of new shoes. Her small eyes darted around curiously, full of wonder. She was adorable. Then, I found a cheap motel for us to stay in while I searched for a shop. For 3 days, I scouted for a location. Chloe was like a little cat, quiet and obedient, but always by my side when I called her. Eventually, I secured a small storefront near a factory. Though tiny, it was enough for what I needed. The only downside was that, because of its proximity to the factory, the landlord demanded a high price. It pained me a little to pay so much, but I gritted my teeth and signed the lease. On the first day, I scrubbed the entire place from top to bottom. Chloe, clutching a small rag, eagerly wiped and cleaned alongside me. She was well-behaved and diligent, and with her help, we finished tidying up quickly. The night before opening, I was struggling to braid Chloe's hair. In my past life, my home had been filled with boys, so suddenly having a daughter threw me off. My hands fumbled awkwardly with her short locks. Just then, an old neighbor from back home called. "How's life in the capital? Is everything going smoothly?" Before I could answer, she continued excitedly, "You wouldn't believe what happened. Turns out, Mia Brooks wasn't just stringing along Michael Carter. She had another man on the side. Michael got drunk one night and went looking for her, only to find a strange man in her house. And the kid was even helping keep watch for them. A family full of shameless crooks." I paused, my fingers momentarily still against Chloe's hair. "So what happened?" I asked. "What do you think?" Michael Carter lost his temper and barged in. Started a fight with a guy. But in the end, he was the one who got scammed. He ended up getting extorted for money. Can you believe it? He's completely broke now. He even tried going back to your house. But when he didn't find you there, He went crazy and smashed a bunch of things. Your parents were furious. But he just kept yelling about how you had to pay him back for the furniture. Shameless bastard. The neighbor spat in disgust. Serves him right. He deserves to lose everything after the way he treated you. I smiled faintly and continued braiding Chloe's hair. Hearing about Michael Carter's downfall didn't bring me the satisfaction I had once imagined. Instead of feeling triumphant, I just felt indifferent. I had no energy to waste on the past. All I wanted now was to live a good life with Chloe. But just as I was ready to put everything behind me, someone else clearly wasn't. On the morning of my shop's grand opening, I received several calls from unknown numbers, but I was too busy needing dough to bother answering. Chloe ended up picking up one of them, then turned to me and said, "They wouldn't listen." I didn't care. I focused on preparing the dough, shaping the buns and steamed bread, and placing them neatly into the steaming baskets. Chloe and I then sat by the shop's entrance, waiting for customers. People walked past in a steady stream, but no one stopped. As I was trying to figure out what was wrong, Chloe, small and full of determination, suddenly jumped down from her chair. She took a deep breath and shouted, "Fresh steamed buns. Hot and delicious. Eat one, and you'll have energy for the whole day." Her bright little voice, combined with the two messy, uneven buns I had tied in her hair, made her look even more adorable. Several passing factory workers stopped, bending down with interest. "Are they really that good?" one of them asked. Chloe nodded enthusiastically, pulling a worker over to try one. With that, more followed, and soon, business was rolling in. We stayed busy for several hours until the workers returned to their shifts. As the rush died down, we finally took a break. Waiting for passing customers, Chloe brought me a cup of water. Just as I was about to take it, a strong hand snatched it away, spilling water all over the ground. A cold voice rang out, "So this is why you divorced me?" I looked up to see Michael Carter gripping my wrist tightly. No matter how much I struggled, I couldn't break free. "I knew you were making a big deal out of nothing. You divorced me over petty arguments. But in reality, it was all for this child, wasn't it? So tell me, who's the father? Since we have history, I'll do you a favor. I'll check him out for you." I nearly burst out laughing. Michael Carter was truly shameless. He actually thought everyone was as morally bankrupt as he was. Without hesitation, I grabbed the rolling pin from the counter and slammed it down hard on his hand. He winced and let go, gritting his teeth. "You'd really hit me over some other man? After all those years I spent taking care of you." I suddenly remembered the early days of our relationship. Back then, he had tried to be a good husband. He used to pick flowers for me, bring me pastries, and even wake up in the middle of the night to fetch a doctor when I was sick. But everything changed the moment Mia Brooks got divorced. From that point on, the Michael Carter who once cherished me suddenly became the man who only had eyes for his lost love. In his mind, I had become nothing more than a parasite. No matter how much I contributed, he never saw it. Taking a deep breath, I glared at him, my voice laced with exhaustion. "Not everyone is as disgusting as you are. I still have morals. And for the record, for all those years, if anything, I was the one supporting you. Your wages? You spent them on Mia Brooks' kids' food, on her new clothes. How much did you actually bring home?" Hearing my words, Michael Carter's face relaxed slightly, as if he had just discovered something amusing. "So, you're still jealous? All this time, and you still care?" He smirked. "Come home with me, and let's pretend none of this ever happened." Saying that, he grabbed my arm and tried to drag me away. But before I could react, Chloe suddenly threw herself at his leg and bit down hard. "You're not allowed to bully my mommy." That single word, "mommy," shocked Michael Carter to his core. His eyes widened, and before he could stop himself, he reached down, ready to yank Chloe away. I immediately rushed forward, pulling Chloe into my arms, my expression fierce. Grabbing the nearest broom, I pointed it at him. "Get lost. If you don't, I'll make sure you regret it." By then, the factory workers had started coming back from their shifts. More and more people passed by, casting curious glances our way. Michael Carter, unwilling to make a scene in public, finally clenched his jaw, turned on his heel, and left. As soon as he was gone, I let out a long breath and set Chloe down. I carefully checked her over, making sure she wasn't hurt. My heart was still pounding from fear. "Don't ever get involved in situations like that again," I scolded, my voice trembling slightly. "It's too dangerous." But Chloe only giggled, waving her hands in exaggerated gestures as she excitedly reenacted what had just happened. Her little face beamed with pride. "I can protect myself." For the past few days, I hadn't seen Michael Carter anywhere. That was for the best. I had no desire to waste my breath on him any longer. Meanwhile, business at my little shop was steadily improving. The same batch of food that used to take until the afternoon to sell out was now almost gone by morning. Many of the customers Chloe had pulled in became regulars, some even bringing friends. They started complaining that my menu was too simple and that they were getting tired of eating the same things. After giving it some thought, I decided to expand the menu and bought new ingredients to start making porridge. It was around this time that I met Henry Chun. He was a shy, soft-spoken man who often came by to buy food. Whenever a truck arrived to deliver supplies, he would always help move the heavy crates without being asked. Over time, he and Chloe grew familiar with each other, and he would bring her little candies whenever he visited. "Thank you so much. I feel bad always troubling you. From now on, your meals are on the house," I said, smiling warmly at him. He froze for a moment, then lowered his head, embarrassed, as he continued sculpting little figurines out of dough for Chloe. "It's nothing, really," he mumbled. It was funny. Chloe loved delicate little trinkets. But despite spending my whole life working with my hands, I was nowhere near as skilled as Henry when it came to making these tiny creations. I had just packed a fresh bag of steaming meat buns to give him when a sudden gust of wind whooshed past. And before I could react, Henry's face was hit hard by a fist. "How dare you try to seduce my wife? Do you even know what you look like?" The voice was dripping with malice. Turning around sharply, I saw Michael Carter standing there, looking absolutely wretched. His face was covered in unkempt stubble. His clothes were wrinkled and filthy, and the overwhelming stench of alcohol and cigarette smoke clung to him. The moment he appeared, the atmosphere dropped to freezing. I shoved him aside and quickly helped Henry up, my glare cold and unwavering. "What the hell is wrong with you now? If you have so much free time, go get a job instead of showing up here to throw tantrums. I don't have the patience for your nonsense." I kept repeating to myself. I was no longer that helpless old woman trapped in a miserable marriage, nor was I the powerless housewife with no means to escape. Now, I had my own shop. I had Chloe. I had the ability to fight back. With that thought, my hands no longer trembled, and my voice carried strength. But Michael Carter only laughed coldly, his eyes flashing with something sinister. "So this is what you've been up to? Raising some bastard child while seducing another man? I really misjudged you. First, I thought you were better than this. But look at you, already with a new man and a kid. What's next? Planning your second marriage. Sophia." I stared straight into his eyes, utterly exhausted. "There's no other man. No second marriage. Unlike you, I don't need someone by my side to survive. I work hard so I never have to depend on anyone, especially not someone like you. And let's be honest, when have you ever given me anything to rely on?" Something in my words must have finally struck him. Michael Carter stiffened, his smugness faltering. For the first time, he seemed to realize that the woman standing before him was no longer the same person who once begged for his love. He tried to regain control, his voice softening as he reached for my arm. "Did I make you unhappy? I'll apologize. Okay, I didn't mean to hit you that day. I was just angry because you actually wanted to leave me. We've been together for so long. You know me, Sophia. I can't live without you." He hesitated before adding, "And about Mia Brooks. I only helped her because she supported me when I was struggling. That's all. Besides, raising a child alone isn't easy for a woman. It's not what you think." Michael Carter's voice carried a rare trace of desperation. "If you come back with me, I promise I'll cut ties with her. I won't have anything to do with her anymore. Can't you believe me?" That moment, memories of our past together flooded my mind. In the beginning, Michael Carter had been grateful for everything I did. He appreciated the way I took care of him, the way I devoted myself to our home. He used to worry about my hands cracking from washing clothes in the winter, gently rubbing lotion into my skin. He used to wake up early to prepare porridge for me after I came back from the market, exhausted. But over time, he began to take it all for granted. He got used to waking up to breakfast on the table. He got used to his clothes, tossed carelessly onto chairs, magically finding their way back to the wardrobe, clean and neatly folded, as if these things happened on their own. Somewhere along the way, Michael Carter stopped expressing love, stopped believing that love even existed between us. Instead, he called it family. But I knew the truth. What he really couldn't live without wasn't me. It was the convenience. It was having a free housekeeper. Because when it came to actually caring for someone, he had never cared for me. But he had always been so considerate of Mia Brooks. In his eyes, I had become someone who no longer needed him. I slowly pried his fingers off my arm, one by one, my voice calm but firm. "Michael, it's too late. There is no us anymore. You're greedy. I continued, my tone unwavering. You wanted Mia Brooks. But at the same time, you expected someone to stay home and take care of everything for you, even if she had never come back. Do you really think we would have lasted? His body stiffened, his expression darkening with a hint of sadness. But I didn't understand. Why was he sad? I was giving him exactly what he wanted. So why was he still standing here, playing the victim? Eventually, Michael Carter walked away in defeat, leaving behind nothing but a mess. Chairs knocked over, the floor littered with spilled food. With a sigh, I bent down to start cleaning. When I looked up, I saw Chloe holding a tiny broom, quietly sweeping up the debris with a serious expression. Henry was also silently putting the chairs back in place. The shop slowly returned to its neat and tidy state. As Henry was about to leave, I took out a small red envelope and handed it to him. I really appreciate your help today. This is just a small thank you. He quickly shook his head and refused. No. There's no need for that. Seeing that he wouldn't take it, I sighed and instead invited him to stay for dinner as a way to repay him. After we ate, Henry helped bring the dishes to the kitchen. Then, after hesitating for a moment, he turned back to look at me. Taking a deep breath, he finally spoke. Sophia, you're raising Chloe on your own. It's not easy. If that man comes back to bother you again, having another man in the house might make things easier for you. What do you think? It took me a couple of seconds to process his words before I realized. He was indirectly confessing. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a tiny pair of pigtails flash past the window. Smiling, I looked up at Henry and said gently, not every relationship between a man and a woman has to be romantic. Friendship is just as important. You're a good person, Henry, and I believe you'll find someone just as good to walk alongside you. Right now, I just want to focus on raising Chloe and taking care of my shop. Henry was a smart man. He could hear the finality in my voice. He didn't insist. That night, Chloe seemed upset. She refused to sleep with me, turning her back and curling up under the blanket. I thought she was still shaken from Michael Carter's outburst earlier, so I patiently coaxed her. But after a long silence, a muffled voice finally came from under the covers. Mommy, did you say no to Uncle Henry because of me? Am I holding you back? Only then did I realize. This little girl had been blaming herself for my rejection. My heart ached. I pulled her into my arms and held her tightly. She had been through so much already, forced to grow up too soon, always overthinking everything. I gently tucked her into bed, softly patting her back. No, sweetheart. Not at all. I just don't want to get married. That's all. Chloe peeked up at me with wide, curious eyes. But my other mommy used to say that all girls have to get married. I gazed into her innocent eyes and asked, when you heard her say that, did it make you happy? She thought about it for a while, then shook her head. I smiled and brushed her hair back. Marriage isn't the only path in life. You can choose to walk with someone, or you can choose to walk alone. Whatever you decide, as long as you're happy, that's what matters. Marriage has its benefits. Having someone by your side to support you can make life easier. But there will always be ups and downs. Walking alone is harder sometimes, but learning to rely on yourself is something truly amazing. Chloe nodded, half understanding, and soon drifted off to sleep. I watched Chloe, my heart filled with warmth. She was, without a doubt, the best decision I had ever made in my life. A gift from fate. Something my grandfather must have sent my way. And just like that, we spent half a year together, side by side. Henry Chen still stopped by occasionally to help out, but he had also met a wonderful woman. I was genuinely happy for him. The menu at my shop kept expanding, and the number of customers steadily increased. The business was thriving, but I wasn't satisfied. I wanted more. So, I reached out to some of the women from my old neighborhood and told them about my plan to open multiple locations, even proposing a contract with the nearby factory to provide meals. But I was short on manpower. Without hesitation, my friends immediately packed up and came to help, their enthusiasm making me so emotional I nearly cried. Life became busier than ever, managing new locations, refining recipes, handling logistics. I poured my heart into every single task. Yet, during this time, I had the unsettling feeling of being watched, as if someone was silently lingering in the background. It wasn't just a hunch. I started noticing little things. The trash in front of my shop would mysteriously disappear before I even had the chance to take it out. The moment I inquired about a new location, I would be told that someone had already placed a deposit on the rent. Every now and then, I would receive unexpected deliveries. Seasonal clothes sent anonymously. I knew exactly who was behind it, but I chose to ignore it. Some things are better left to time. If I dug too deep, it would only bring unnecessary trouble. Finally, on the grand opening day of my second shop, the sound of firecrackers filled the air in celebration. And then, Michael Carter appeared. It had been a long time since I'd seen him, and he was dressed surprisingly formal. Chloe immediately bared her teeth in defiance, ready to chase him away. But instead of retaliating, he simply ruffled her hair. There was something unreadable in his expression. He seemed torn between dignity and defeat. "Make sure your mom stays happy." "All right," he said softly. "That's not something I can do anymore. So I'll leave it to you." Chloe scrunched her nose and made a funny face. "Of course. She's my mom. I'll always take care of her." Michael let out a low chuckle before stepping toward me. He handed me a large red envelope. "I used to think I could do better. That's why, even though we had a decent life, I still compared you to others. I'm sorry. I never considered how that made you feel. I was so caught up in chasing after what I didn't have that I ignored what was already in front of me." His voice carried an unusual sincerity. "You've built a good life for yourself. You're strong, and you should never let a family tie hold you back. You made the right choice. I guess I wasn't ready to let go." He placed the envelope in my hands. "This money is yours. You earned it." This time, I didn't refuse. He was right. I had worked for this, endured for this. It was what I deserved. As I watched him walk away, shoulders slumped in silent defeat, I turned back and took Chloe's hand. Together, we lit another firecracker, the sound erupting in celebration. People clapped and laughed, sharing in the joyous moment. Chloe, startled by the loud bangs, covered her ears and ran around in circles. For once, she looked like a true child, free, playful, unburdened by the weight of the past. A full year passed in peaceful routine. During that time, my parents came to visit. First, they weren't pleased about Chloe, but she had a way of winning people over. She poured tea for them, massaged their shoulders, and slowly melted their resistance. Through a friend, I eventually learned that after Michael Carter left town, he spiraled even further. He drowned himself in alcohol, barely distinguishing day from night, until one bitterly cold night, he was found frozen on the streets. I didn't react. I didn't seek out more details. I had long accepted that we all live by our choices. Michael Carter had made his, and this was how his story ended. Meanwhile, my story was still unfolding. Kneeling in front of Chloe, I held out a school bag, encouraging her to put it on. She hesitated, a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. Over the past year, I had worked tirelessly to secure her legal documents, officially making her my daughter. Now, she could finally attend school like any other child. But she was reluctant. "Mommy, you shouldn't spend so much money on me," she murmured. I laughed, playfully knocking her on the forehead. "Money is meant to be spent on you. Besides, once you grow up, you can make money and spend it on me." She frowned, seriously contemplating my words before finally nodding. That morning, under the warm sunlight, I walked her to school. The golden rays illuminated the elegant sign above my shop, casting a soft glow on Chloe's tiny, determined face. Her little cheeks, still covered in baby fuzz, looked radiant in the light. Watching her skip through the school gates, her backpack bouncing, I felt a deep, comforting sense of peace. Our future had finally begun to unfold.